Welcome to video 9 of the Lead Guitar Quick Start series. In this lesson, I'm going to give you some tips for building your own guitar solos. And these tips are going to be important because the last thing you want is for your solos to sound like you're just practicing through a scale or an exercise. If you're just jumping into the series on this lesson for the first time, I'd really recommend that you go back to the first lesson in this series and complete all of them, because a lot of the foundational stuff we're going to be using is covered throughout all of those lessons. In this lesson, we're going to be covering concepts like phrasing, repeating themes, leaving space, building your solos dynamically, and playing over simple chord changes too. The first thing I want to talk to you about is phrasing. Now, it's often good to structure your solos kind of like you're talking to someone. If I'm talking to someone, I don't just talk in a monotone voice all the time and just keep running all my sentences together until the conversation is over. Like, that doesn't make much of any sense. That's the equivalent of playing a guitar solo, just playing up and down a scale without stopping, right? What you do when you talk to somebody is you leave pauses. You have inflections in your voice and rest times where you wait. And that's the same thing with your guitar solos. If you stop here and there and have inflections go up and down, it makes your solo a lot more interesting. The next thing I want to talk to you about is repeating a theme throughout your solo. You're not always going to want to do this, but sometimes it's nice to have a little recurring theme that can kind of tie your solo together and make it more cohesive. What this also does naturally is it kind of helps your phrasing that we just talked about. It gives you a space for pauses when you repeat a little theme like this. You'll see what I'm talking about in the solo that we're going to learn in the next lesson. There's a repeating theme that's really obvious that gives the solo a nice overall sound. One thing that's kind of hard for us guitar players to do is leave space in between notes. A lot of times we just want to be able to play through a scale or a fast lick just because we've been working on it. But sometimes in your solos you're going to want to leave space just to keep the listener engaged and keep them tied into what you're playing. So in the solo that we're going to be learning, there's a little theme stated, like I said, and there's a little space where you're not playing anything. And then you're going to restate that theme again. Another way to make your solos more interesting and engaging to the listener is to build them dynamically. And what I mean by that, when I say build your solo dynamically, you can, start off quieter and more sparse, build a little more, and by the end you have some room to just be screaming for a fast lick or, a louder part. And this isn't always going to be the case for every solo, but it's a great tool to pull out when you have a song that's more emotional or you want to create kind of a crescendo, simple to a climax in your solo, right? And you can think of it as a movie script. Movies generally don't stay up all the time. Even the best action movies have lulls, peaks and valleys in them in a plot. So it starts off slow and maybe gets a little bit more exciting, and then there's a climax and a resolution. The next tip I want to give you is to start playing over the chord changes. And by that, I mean you need to adjust the notes or scales that you're playing to fit over the chords that are happening in the song that you're playing over. So in the case of the solo we're going to learn in the next lesson, the two chords in the jam track that we have are G and an E minor. What we're going to do is adjust our scales or our note choices to fit over the G chord when it's playing. So we're going to use G major scales and G major pentatonic scales. And when the E minor chord comes around, we're going to switch to an E minor pentatonic scale. That's a really simple example, but it's an awesome way to start thinking about actually choosing your notes instead of just playing through random scales. So those are just a few useful tips in general for soloing that are going to come in handy throughout your guitar career, especially in the next lesson where I'm going to teach you the solo that I've written out that applies everything that we've learned up to this point. And of course, these tips won't apply to every solo, but they are a good starting point to help you make your solos a bit more musical instead of sounding like you're just playing through scales. So in the next lesson, we're going to learn a solo that I've written out for you, your first guitar solo, so be excited for that. If you have any questions about these concepts that I talked about in this lesson, leave them below and I'll get back to you. You can also email me, Nate@guitarsystem.com. See ya.